STEMology, the Young Scientist Survival Guide, Session 15. This is STEMology with Alina Adams. Welcome back to this week's episode. Today we are doing things a little differently. This is the first time STEMology has been able to answer questions students have been curious to know. First, after introducing my guest today and her roles on campus, we will start off with some advice and information students should have before their first day on campus. Think of it kind of as housekeeping notes, some basics to make for a smoother ride. Secondly, we will just kind of jump into some frequently asked questions that incoming freshmen have. In episode 14, I alluded to Dr. Welchert's presence as the first university professor I have the pleasure to speak with. I'm pretty stoked, to say the least. Thank you for carving out some time to speak with me on behalf of the students today, Professor.
Hi, Alina. I'm excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me. As you said, I'm Dr. Tammy Welchert, and I'm an associate teaching professor and serve as the Director for Student Affairs and Academic Advising for the School of Biological and Chemical Sciences, or SBC, at the University of Missouri, Kansas City.
That's awesome. Well, thank you for carving out some time. Like I said, it's great that you're here.
Great to be here.
So when you first brought these questions to me, I was immediately excited because a lot of these questions I recognized from, well, one, when I was a freshman, and two, from working with younger freshmen or high school students, so I know this is going to be a pretty beneficial topic. My younger self is even a little jealous because it took me a long time to figure these things out, so. Where did you collect these questions from? Was it your position as an academic advisor?
Years of experience. I've been an advisor at UMKC for more than 20 years.
Wow, yeah.
So I've had a lot of students, yes. So, my experience working with students varies from new students coming right out of high school, our new freshmen, transfer students who may be coming in with any number of credits and have different life experiences. I've worked with displaced workers who are coming back to get some education to move into a new career. I work with students who are adult learners who may be in vocational rehabilitation programs, and also our students who may be active or veteran military personnel. So one of the great things about my position as director is that I have a team of advisors to work with. And several of the advisors, including myself, have children who are in college currently or who are preparing to enter this fall, or maybe are just a few years away from thinking about college. So I reached out to them to see what questions their children have too.
I love that all the SBC advisors came together to support students like that. And that's also kind of where my first question stems from. In your words, what is an academic advisor and what's their role? How can they be of service to students?
Sure. Academic advisors play lots of different roles for students. We are a student's advocate. We're kind of their academic coach. And in a lot of ways, we're essentially their parent away from home. Advisors are knowledgeable about campus, about policy and procedures, about forms students may need to complete. We can also help students find ways to engage on campus. We're familiar with the student organizations on campus. We're familiar with our city and the community resources that may be available. I think one of the best things about an advisor is that we have such a vast professional network ourselves that we're able to provide the best and most accurate answers to students' questions and concerns.
Sounds like you all do a lot.
We wear a lot of hats.
So one of the first things you had ever mentioned to me when we were first talking about airing this episode was a glaring issue you noticed. When students first step on campus, they drop the doctor and replace it with Miss or Mrs. or Mr. Would you like to elaborate on the proper way to address college professors?
Sure. This is something that's probably quite different from high school for most students. In high school, they don't refer to their faculty as doctor, or really there's not an acknowledgement of any type of degree that their faculty in high school may have had, and so they refer to them as Mr. or Mrs. That's how it's been done all through the K through 12 system. But in college, students really should refer to their faculty as professor or doctor, regardless of their gender. And this is sometimes confusing for students because they may not know the degree status for their professor, but as a general rule of thumb, students should always assume that their faculty have the highest degree in their field, and then they can address them as doctor. If this isn't correct, the faculty member will always correct the student and let them know how they prefer to be addressed. I should note that it is important for students to refer to our staff as Mr. or Mrs.
You noted something pretty interesting, is that it's always better to start at the top and kind of go down from there. So start at doctor. I don't think anyone would ever be upset at being referred to as a doctor if they're not one. So
Exactly.
You can't really go wrong there. I was wondering if it was any different for letters or emails to professors. What would your suggestions be in those scenarios?
So that's a great question, and the answer is the same. When students are sending emails, there are a couple of things that they should remember. Number one is the greeting that we're talking about now. The greeting should be to Dr. Welchert, for example, just as we discussed. Students should always remember to include their student ID number with their signature when they're sending an email. Students may not think they have a very common name, but you would be surprised how many John Smiths we have. At UMKC, there are like 21 students named John Smith. So including the student ID number will help us to look up your record more quickly and help us respond back to you in a more timely manner.
I'm glad you mentioned adding in school ID numbers. That's something that I know that I can do to make it a little easier on you all too.
Yeah, that's a great idea. The last thing that I would bring to students' attention is subject lines for an email. This may be something that students maybe haven't thought a lot about, but the subject line may be the most important part of an email because that's what faculty use to determine the importance of an email and to make determinations about the priority that we respond. A clear, concise subject line like Biology 108, Chapter 3, Question 4 lets us know exactly what a student needs. And if we know that this homework is due soon or that students are preparing for an upcoming exam, we'll respond more quickly to be sure the student gets the information that they need.
This is something I comment on quite frequently on the podcast, but what can you tell me about office hours? Is it true or false that professors just widely think their students are wasting their time and they hope that we never show up to ask questions about their courses?
Oh, Alina, that is absolutely false. Office hours are severely underutilized. If you talk to most professors, they'll tell you that they know that there are students that have questions and need assistance, but they don't come for exactly the reasons that you stated, that students have this false idea that they're going to be wasting our time or that we're going to think they're stupid for asking that question, and that just is simply untrue. Students really need to think of office hours as their golden ticket to a first-class seat at our desk. I love being able to sit down one-on-one with a student to answer questions and to help them understand the material or an assignment question. In large lecture classes, we just simply don't have the opportunity to interact with students one-on-one and get to know them very well. So our office hours are the perfect place for us to be able to do that.
Yeah, I think it could be pretty intimidating sometimes, so I'm glad people are hearing this information.
We want students to be successful. And I'll tell you, the truly great thing about office hours, when we have the opportunity to get to know a student because they're coming to office hours, we get invested in them. We get invested in their success. And as they come back to ask questions again and again, we get to know them better and better. And we may start sharing articles that we come across in our reading that we think the student may be interested in. And we may know about internships or employment positions that we can share. And the better we get to know them, the more invested we become in helping them not only succeed in undergraduate to complete their degree, but also in making their transition into graduate or professional schools or into the workforce after graduation.
Those relationships and connections with your professors are so important, so I hope you kind of take this information to heart and use it. There you have it, folks. If you ever thought I was overstating the importance, well, now you know. The last topic I was hoping to discuss is classroom etiquette. Are there some major differences between high school and college? Perhaps eating in class or asking to use the restroom, electronic usage, or anything like that?
That's a really interesting phenomenon. And yes, there are big differences. For some reason, students seem to instinctively know that in college, they are in a more professional environment. And for the most part, they assume more professional behavior. In class, students should always be on time or even early so that when a professor is ready to begin class, that they're seated and ready to learn. And students don't have to ask permission to leave to use the restroom. If a student thinks they may need to step out during class, it's always a good idea to let the professor know before class starts. And then sit near an exit so when they do need to leave, they can do so without distracting the other students around them. The use of phones phones is sometimes problematic. So students need to remember to turn their phones off or turn it on vibrate when they're in class. You mentioned electronic usage. Many students take notes on their laptop. That's pretty common, but this makes it very easy for students to access their social media or take virtual shopping trips.
Yes, it does.
And that's, it's okay, but it is distracting for students around them, especially the students sitting directly behind them. So that's probably some behavior that should be avoided when you're in class. This is something for another time, but did you know that scientific research and education has noted that students who handwrite their notes have better retention of the material?
That sounds pretty accurate to me. I feel like I understand and process information better when I write it down. And you also mentioned going to class early and getting set up for the day, and I always feel a lot more comfortable and ready to learn when I get there beforehand. Now for the fun part. I'm going to break out that list of direct questions students have for their advisors, and I thought we'd just kind of tackle them as a team one by one. What do you think?
Sounds like a great idea.
How do I know which classes to take and when?
Oh, so that's a great question. And I'm going to go back to talk to your advisor. Your advisors are the most knowledgeable people. They should really be your go-to person for anything that you need to know. But there are a number of other ways that students can find out this information too. A lot of students will enroll in some type of a first semester experience course, and that's where they're going to gain additional knowledge about majors, about courses. Also, there are major maps. So if you go, for instance, to the UMKC website, in the search bar, you can type in major maps, and that will give a student a semester by semester kind of ideal plan for how they can plan all of their classes all the way through to graduation to make sure that they stay on time. The catalog is a helpful resource. And also, many institutions have a degree audit system where students can go to see how their past coursework is applying to meet their requirements and what they have left, including the choices of courses that they can use to fulfill those remaining requirements.
That all sounds like good advice. Question number 2, what if I don't like my roommate or my dorm room?
Oh, that's a pretty common question. So just like students have an academic advisor, students also have a resident hall assistant. So if they're living in one of the residence halls, they have a student worker who is kind of assigned to help them with problems such as personality conflicts or maintaining the rules that you agreed to with your roommate. Issues with the dorm room, they can help you also problem solving. If it's too hot or too cold, or maybe there's a clogged sink, they're the person that you can go to help you resolve those issues. Also, students can use their academic advisor. We have lots of life experience, and we've worked with lots of students and lots of colleagues, and sometimes we have personality issues that we have to manage too, and we can talk with you about how we've learned to do that successfully.
That sounds like a great resource. I definitely have had my fair share of roommate woes and difficulties working with people, so it'd be great to get a second perspective and really get some insight on this situation. So this is the last question I was going to ask. Will I get slammed with a bunch of work on my first day or week of college?
Oh, probably yes. College is not going to be an easy ride, and I think that's something that comes as a shock to a lot of students. We always kind of warn our new freshmen that we understand that students may have been very successful in high school with very little effort, and that just simply isn't going to be the case in college. Organization and good time management plans will be the key to any student's success. And I think it's important for students to understand that faculty expect that students will spend 2 to 3 hours outside of class for every hour that they are physically in class to complete reading, homework, to review their notes, and to think. And yes, I did just say just to sit and think about the material that's being presented in class. That's something that I don't think a lot of students know to do, is just to think about the material and how it relates to what else they've learned. Or, if a lot of students, for instance, in biology and in science, they're not just taking biology classes, they're also taking a chemistry class and a physics class, and thinking about how all of that material comes together.
That's not probably the answer students wanted to hear, is that their first week is going to be tough. But I think it's better to be prepared and go into it with a mindset of let's do this, I know what to expect, than to kind of be blindsided by a bunch of work. And a quick tip that I wanted to give was the sooner after you learn that material that you sit down and think about it, like you said, it's probably the better you're going to retain it. A follow-up question to that was, what is college homework like?
So unlike high school, where students may have tried to memorize facts, in college, college, we really assess mastery of the material primarily through application. And what that means is that if you've learned the material well enough, I should be able to present you with a new problem or a new situation, and you should know how to use the material or the information that you learned to solve or answer that question.
That's a great point. The first time that was presented to me on an exam, it kind of surprised me, and I was like, oh no, now I have to rewire my brain to think of things through.
I think that's common that students are a little surprised to see exam questions that aren't exactly the material that we covered in class. So that's an important difference that students should be aware of.
Yeah, so thank you for bringing that up. But just so you know, I'm going to stop here for this episode. There were quite a few really good questions, weren't there?
There were.
And I also wanted to say that I have a lot of respect for you, Dr. Welchert, and I'm so glad that you were able to find some time to be here today. So thank you so much for doing that. I feel kind of exhausted just going through those 4 questions that we had. So I'm sure doing this day in and day out is pretty tiring, but you do a great job.
It's a very rewarding job. It really is. It's exciting to see students move through and succeed and keep in touch and see all the great things that they do in the future. So I've really enjoyed my career.
Yeah, you get to see us from day 1 through our 4 years. We kind of grow up a lot in those 4 years, I like to think.
You sure do.
Awesome. But regardless, I know we'll see you back here for a second episode, maybe, with a little more insight and more perspective for these students' questions.
That sounds great. Love to be back.
Well, in the next episode of STEMology, I'm bringing back one of the original interviewees, Lauren Ide, but this time to discuss the trials and tribulations of dating in graduate school. She brings with her a few special guests. Her boyfriend Ezra and a second couple, Kayla and Felix, have decided to come through and answer some questions and provide some understanding. I am by no means a relationship expert, so trust me when I say I needed some solid backup for this next episode. And these 2 couples were just the lovers for the job. Share and subscribe to listen to this episode and plenty more like it. If there were any additional questions you have and need to be answered, go ahead and send me a quick message at STEMologyYSSG@gmail.com, or you can reach out to me on our Facebook page, Instagram at the STEMology Podcast, or Twitter at STEMologyYSSG, so I can introduce some content that matters to you. Thank you for listening to our 15th episode of STEMology, a Young Scientist Survival Guide. Tune in with me, Alina Adams, for episode 16, Dating in Graduate School. See you next time.